Hi, my name's Athan, and you're listening to Fifth Period, and this is going to be the best episode, Indiana Jones. Woo!
Hello everyone and welcome back to Fifth Period, the film podcast that is increasingly becoming a straight-out dedication to the 80s. Each week, two media teachers talk through a different film that has been played out as part of the Film Appreciation Club at our school. And once again, the selection has fallen into the leg-warming, cassette tape-playing, Rubik's Cube solving decade that we all know and love. I'm Mr. Brown, and with me as always is my co-host.
Mr. Whittle, hello everyone. I'm glad to have you back. I am glad to be here sitting opposite Mr. Brown today. We're going to have a highly topical conversation here because we're not going to see eye to eye. Just calling it out here and now, this might be the most divided out of the 6 episodes we've done so far of the Fifth Period, where we are not going to come into an agreement on many topics about our film, which is
Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade.
Yes.
I'm a big Indiana Jones fan. I know you're not a huge fan, and you haven't been a huge fan, and I was well prepared for that. But then when we were watching it on Friday, you were like, oh, I'm actually quite enjoying the start of this film. So I got my hopes up, only for them to be dashed with a message over the weekend with you saying you had not enjoyed the experience.
Yeah, so anyone who was in the room or has ever come along to our film club on a Friday, just so you're aware, we obviously watch the first 20 to 30 minutes of a film. You get the opportunity to go home and watch the rest of it. I was enjoying the first 15 to 20 minutes. I think I turned to Mr. Brown in the opening scene and said, this is really good. And with a surprise tone, like I just delivered then. As I watched at home, that changed in terms of my view on the film, but we'll get to that.
Yeah, and look, I mean, I feel I've lucked out with our film choices so far for the year. 5 of the 6 films I've really enjoyed, and 3 of them are some of my absolute top films of all time, including Indiana Jones. So,
and look, I'll put it out there right now. It's not that there wasn't parts that I didn't enjoy. So I am mixed, but that doesn't mean I'm wholly against this film. We'll get to the bit by bit, but there's parts that I did like as well, for sure.
Yeah, and I think it'll make for an interesting episode today because we'll be able to actually get into some spirited debates.
For sure. So obviously the obligatory spoiler warning, we are going to be deep diving into this film as we do on every episode of the podcast. So if you have not yet seen this film, go and watch it. Even if you want to go, but Mr. Whittle, maybe I'm like you and won't enjoy it. Or you don't know until you watch it, guys. That's what I love about film, by the way, is that I will sit down and watch any film at least once because you don't know until you give it a go, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Before we jump into it, just want to give a quick shout out to Athan, who actually introduced today's episode. He is one of our regulars at Film Club and seemed a very suitable choice for today's podcast because Indiana Jones is one of his favorites. He and his friends actually swept in with a wave of last-minute votes to get it selected for this week. He also offered up some pretty interesting little tidbits as we were watching on Friday. I didn't know this before he'd mentioned it. The uniforms, the Nazi uniforms that they use in the book burning sequence are actually authentic Nazi uniforms from World War II. So they didn't make any replicas, they actually used them. So that was something that even as a big fan myself, I didn't know. So yes, he's a suitable choice for the introduction today. He thinks it's going to be the best episode yet, so let's do him proud.
So that's a challenge, is that I need to do Athan proud because if he likes the film, I'm already kind of set up to annoy him, aren't I?
Yeah, well, look, he's already done me proud by choosing it in the first place. I said to him on Friday in my best Knights of the Crusade voice, "You chose wisely."
Yes, very good.
All right, let's jump straight in.
So the film starts with a bit of a flashback. I love context through a form of a flashback when it's also character developing, and this one doesn't disappoint in that regard.
It has that classic Paramount logo that turns into the mountain, mountainscape, which all Indiana Jones films have.
Okay.
Some controversially because they are a CGI molehill from the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. But they all do that, and it's just a nice way to start the film. it feels very of the time, and it's a cool transition into the world.
Yeah, and like then we go into that world, and it's so Spielberg from the first shot, every shot, it just feels like a Spielberg movie. We're at, what year was this? 89, this one?
It was 89.
89. So we were well into the era. Jaws was done in the 70s, E.T. early 80s. But that whole look, that the way he has a crisp look to his camera. Also, the way he frames things are set for action. He's very action orientated with what he's looking for within his shots.
Yeah, it's really interesting because Harrison Ford is obviously synonymous with the role. Even in recent years when they were talking about rebooting Indiana Jones and having someone else come in and take on the role, it was very controversial because no one could see anyone else playing that role. So what a tricky task to be cast as a young Indiana Jones in a flashback sequence and do it justice as you're going in.
Yeah, but it was young River Phoenix who he was established by then with a few other roles, but he had actually worked with Harrison Ford on Mosquito Coast. And then Harrison Ford recommended him for the role of young Indy.
There you go.
So there's a little bit of trivia that I found. If you know River Phoenix as an actor at all, he was a young up-and-coming actor who died tragically in the early 90s, but really kind of set the bar for someone like Leonardo DiCaprio and co. to he's very similar looking to Leo. Which you pointed out on Friday.
Well, you made a particular note of his hair not being a style of the time that it's representing, which you're absolutely dead on. It looks like something out of Saved by the Bell, that classic 90s haircut.
What era is that? That's 1910s, I think, like the young Indy.
So it goes to 38 later in the film, and I think it's a 26-year jump.
Yeah, early 10s. So... that haircut certainly wouldn't have been around in 1912.
No, but God, he looks good, doesn't he?
Yeah, regardless. And then, even in a barrel of snakes or a cage of snakes, he's doing it well.
Yeah, so this is something that I have to point out. Recently, there's been a bit of a trend in prequel films that have come out where they explain a bunch of things about stuff that exists in the world. So what I mean by that is in the Han Solo prequel film, they give an explanation as to why he has dice hanging in the Millennium Falcon. These sort of nothing moments where you're like, no one ever wondered why he had dice. One that annoyed me a lot in the latest Poirot film, Death on the Nile, they do a flashback to him in war and he gets sort of a wound on his face so that they can justify him growing this big mustache. It's like, he can just have a mustache for the sake of having a mustache. Yeah. And it was something that I never noticed. This entire scene is completely littered with these moments. Indy is introduced and then he goes in and he sees a treasure hunter who's wearing pretty much exactly what he wears when he grows up to be a treasure hunter. And then when we see him on the train and he cracks the whip and it cuts his chin. Yeah. And you're like, oh, that's why Harrison Ford has a scar on his chin. And then later on, he's in the snake pit and you're like, oh, so that's why he's afraid of snakes. And then finally he gets the fedora given to him at the end. You're like, that's where the fedora came from.
But because Spielberg decided to deliver it in like such an over-the-top way where he's just listing out so many of these things, there's kind of an endearing kind of element to it where it's almost the fun of how many can you recognize. He's going to that extreme of it. It's okay.
Oh, that's exactly what I'm saying. I was surprised at how endearing I found that when I was watching it because, I absolutely have had moments in other films where I'm like, why have they explained this? I didn't need to know this.
Yeah. Obviously young Indy runs home with the cross.
Yes, where his father ignores him.
But at that stage, we don't have his father revealed. So we know it's his father, but the reality is, if you've seen the posters, you know Sean Connery is going to be his father.
Yes.
And it's inferred a little bit in that scene as well, because you can hear the accent when he's saying straight in Greek. We're going to have a plethora of Sean Connery impersonations across the podcast, I'm sure.
None of them good.
None of them good. Calling it out early on. Like Sean Connery is such a big marquee actor. It's like a supporting role, but still a big name that came into the world of indie. It was really interesting for me, like clocking at what point we see him in the film. And it was a very deliberate decision by Spielberg to hold back. It takes 48 minutes to see Sean Connery, which is I love it. It's a great decision because it builds the anticipation, knowing it's not just going to be the Ford show. It's also going to be a bit of Connery, and I think it works well. That little hint at the start really adds to setting you up to go, oh, that's right. We're going to get some Sean action at some stage.
And he's so good in it, and he you can tell he's having a good time in it too.
Yeah.
It's the film that almost brought him back out of retirement. So for a long time they were toying with him making a return to the franchise.
Okay.
But obviously there's been so many delays with potential Indiana Jones sequels that were going to come out like off the back of Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. So I think at one point he was on board to make a return, and then the film just didn't happen. And obviously now that's not an option.
Yes.
So then we have a time jump. 26 years later, it jumps ahead, and the guy in the Panama hat is still wearing the same white suit.
Yep.
And it's looking good considering 26 years has passed. He's probably using nappy sand or something like that to keep it nice and crisp.
Yes. So this is Indy on the boat in Portugal, I think, and still chasing the same cross that he had to hand over.
It belongs in a museum.
It belongs in a museum. Yes, and so does Indy.
Yes, you made a point of noting that he gets told that he also belongs in a museum. So they're already calling out the fact that he is past it.
Yeah, little did they know that there'd be like 2 more sequels, because there were one coming up middle of this year, in fact, 30 years later to the film. Yeah.
Jeez, and he's still going strong.
Yes.
Something I love, well, 2 things I really love in this sequence. It was a reminder for me of how explosive all the punch sound effects are. Every time someone gets punched, it's like, it's so good. Like, it's so exaggerated and over the top. It really adds to the world. But the other thing is how clumsy Indy is. Because, I mean, he's obviously not an everyman, because he's doing things that no one can do. He's doing these really great stunts, but in fights, he's not always winning. He's getting beaten up as well. He's slipping over on the boat as the water's crashing through.
Yeah, there's a bit of realism to him, yeah?
For sure, and that was always something that was a real strength of Harrison Ford films in general. Even these ridiculous films like Air Force One, where he's single-handedly taking on, it's just Die Hard on a plane, and he's single-handedly taking on all of these terrorists. He's not always winning. A lot of the time, it's just luck that kind of gets him through the scenario. And so you're still watching these outlandish situations, but you kind of go, yeah, I guess I could buy that.
Another interesting little bit of trivia that came up was that Harrison Ford is an actor who loves doing his own stunts. So he is right into saying, no, thank you, stunt guy. I'll take care of this. So the amount of times that you see Indiana Jones on a horse, more often than not, it is actually Harrison on a horse.
I did make note of that later on in the film. I was watching quite closely, like certain moments where you just go, well, obviously that's not him.
Yeah.
But there are other times where I'm like, I mean, there's no way around that. That would have had to have been him doing these stunts. And I think that was probably something that, again, was heavily criticized in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. A lot of those realistic stunts were substituted with CGI, and it was a big point of contention and criticism from fans, because that was what was so good about the original films, the real sets and locations and stunts that they were doing, which unfortunately the fourth shied away from.
Now I want to go back to a point you just said. Indy isn't an everyman. He is beyond like the standard individual in so many ways. Not a superhero, so still kind of grounded with the possibility of realism. But I did make a point that a note as I was watching, that you do need to care about an unreal character. When I say unreal, like heightened action, fictional fiction, if that makes sense.
Fictional fiction.
Yeah.
I mean, it makes sense for sure.
But you need to care about that stuff in order to enjoy this film. And I think this starts to the point where this isn't my foray. And there's a lot of films I watch that are way more surreal and fictional than this is. But the way this is framed up for me, you need to be invested in the action and what the action hero is doing. And I just couldn't get invested.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So you were really engaged in the teaching scenes.
Yeah, because I felt myself there.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
You know, the students ogling him and then like inundating him in his office, and that's where I felt
that.
real.
I love that he literally has to like push through the crowd to get into his office, and I really did see a lot of us in that sequence.
Yeah,
We're
absolutely.
doing that every day.
For sure.
And likewise, avoiding our responsibilities by climbing out the window and taking off early.
That's how we got to this podcast recording right now.
Otherwise we would have been swarmed by fans
Absolutely.
and students outside our office.
Yes. I came to this realization when we got to the scene where Indy is called to, I even forget the character's name, but he's called to look at the cracked...
Donovan is the character.
Donovan.
Oh, that's his surname, Walter Donovan.
Yes, so Walter Donovan calls Indy to inspect the incomplete... What would you call that?
Tablet?
Yeah, tablet. With the Latin? I think it was Latin, right?
Yeah.
It's at that point, and even though that scene is really interesting, because the first note I got from that scene, and even the previous stuff, was the production design on this film is awesome. The way the sets look, the costumes, the way that Spielberg uses all of the space and what he fills it with. Like, no shot is boring. That scene included, like when he's in Donovan's kind of office area.
And they've got the big open windows.
So
outside.
nice.
Yeah.
It's just a great set. And then like the tablet looks interesting as well. There's just a heap of good stuff in there in order to captivate the audience.
Yeah, and it's a tough thing to do to captivate the audience with sets when you've got a leading man like Harrison Ford stealing the spotlight away.
You're trying to bite me into this conversation, mate, because like you want to know where like.
Isn't it interesting that my way of making you appreciate the film more is just love Harrison Ford, just love him.
You're calling me out on this, and I was going to save it for later, but I'm going to say it right now. I worked it out because all right, I love Sean Connery. I love the character of Brody.
Oh dear.
I love the character of, how do you pronounce it, Saleh? I've worked it out.
Maybe Salah.
Salah, yes, Salah. So, it's Harrison Ford.
No.
It is Harrison Ford that is the root of my disdain for this film. And you know how I validated this? By going to IMDb and going, okay, so maybe I don't like Indiana Jones. Let's see if I like any other Harrison Ford films. Guess what?
Uh-oh.
I couldn't find one.
Wow.
Not one Harrison Ford film I've got fond memories of The Fugitive, and so I should revisit that. But I have a feeling I like that because of Tommy Lee Jones, not because of Harrison Ford.
This is, I mean, it's certainly not mind-blowing because I already knew you didn't like Indiana Jones, but I reckon I'd be hard-pressed to find someone else who was just like, ugh, Harrison Ford.
And you know what's going to annoy you even more? Is that I
Please.
can't even pinpoint why it is the case. I'm going based on this outcome of that there's no Harrison Ford film that I like to assume that it's him is the key factor for it.
Okay, well that's not going to annoy me even more because that means there's still hope. There's the possibility that we could redeem
okay,
him.
is this where we're going to go? Because we did talk about What Lies Beneath as a film, for example, on Friday when we were watching this.
Great film.
And I had seen it at the time. I can't remember it. So maybe there are still films within the Harrison canon that I need to check out. And maybe I will be turned around. But another franchise that you know that I'm not an overly big fan of, that Harrison Ford is a regular part of, would be, sorry Sharky, Star Wars, all right? I'm not a fan of Star Wars. Now, I wouldn't say it's just because of Harrison Ford in there, but is it a coincidence that he's in that one as well, and I'm also not a fan of it?
Yes.
Okay. Anyway, I don't want to ramble on about this too much, but I do think that it's possible that it's Harrison's presence that holds me back from loving this film, and I can't tell you why.
Okay, well, I mean, I made a joke about you liking the teaching scenes, but I genuinely do really like when he's standing in front of them because Despite the fact that it's an unrealistic depiction of how engaged they are, I think the way that he addresses the classroom is really interesting. And he talks about archaeology is not about being a treasure hunter, and X never marks the spot. All of these things, which of course completely contradict the fact that anytime he's not at work, he's off on an archaeological dig, on a big adventure.
Yep.
And I think it's great that he has this sort of grounding of archaeology when he's teaching it that contrasts with his nature. He's not going in there and being like, yeah, this is what it's all about, and oh, you're not going to believe what I captured on the weekend. Like, he doesn't have to showboat it because he thinks that it's interesting enough in itself just to talk about it.
Look at us right now. Like, we are taking time out of our day to talk about our love for film. So I'm in total agreement with the point that you're making there. Doesn't mean I like Indiana Jones.
Fair enough. All right. So going back to the scene with Donovan, who is I guess he's recruiting him for a new quest. The Holy Grail of archaeological finds, which coincidentally just happens to be the Holy Grail itself. Yeah.
Yep.
You mentioned to me that you thought it was interesting all the religious tie-ins in this film, which of course the Ark of the Covenant from the first Indiana Jones is a big religious tie-in, but one of the things that I think is so good about using religion and kind of rooting it in mythological history, like combining the two together, is it's a really good way to include supernatural elements in the film without it seeming overly far-fetched. And it absolutely is far-fetched, but lots of people were like, Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, aliens, that's so like weird and out there. It's like, yeah, but God coming down and smiting people with his wrath and exploding people's heads, that's not out there. And it's just, I guess it's because religion is so rooted in society, people have a lot more willingness to just go, yeah, that's conceivable.
Certainly within Western society, we look to religion with a premise and like thousands of years of acceptance of this mythology for sure. The fact that they didn't just go for it being part of it, like the Holy Grail as a concept is so captivating because of what it is. Like the cup of eternal life, it is Jesus and everything that encapsulates what his power was. Like the phrase Holy Grail is come into use of language as being
this unattainable.
Yeah.
Or something you aspire to get.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You know, so much so that the hunters and collectors used it as a song for the AFL Grand Final, which you know. So just to kind of give you a bit of an example of how that phrase could be used.
It's a good song.
Yes.
It's a good song.
They didn't just use it for that, but then it became that anyway.
One more thing that comes up in this sequence before we move ahead to Venice. Donovan mentions that they are only one step away, and Indy retorts, usually when the ground falls out from underneath you, which is great foreshadowing for the end of the film when Elsa is literally one step away from crossing the threshold of the temple and everything cracks and falls out from underneath it.
I also think it's at this point when the conversation between Donovan and Indy is happening that I get annoyed by John Williams's score.
That's all the John Williamses.
That's correct, because I'm referring to every single film that he has scored. I am not a fan of John Williams' scores. They are obnoxious, they are intrusive, there is music and sound happening when the audience should just be allowed to think about what's happening. But it's like, no, John Williams wants you to hear his annoying violins and his orchestral movements and stuff. It's invasive to me.
Wow.
I do not like it, and I don't like it across all of the Spielberg films, outside of, you've got to love Jaws and what he did with Jaws, but all of the Star Wars as well.
One step backwards.
Oh, so infuriating. You just calm down, mate. All right,
Jeez, you are not here to make friends today. You're attacking the film.
If Riley's listening to this right now, Riley will be reeling on this because he loves John Williams. But yeah, I'm not a fan of his scores. Coincidentally, funnily enough, John Williams is a big influence on Alan Silvestri, who we've talked about with Back to the Future, and I love what Alan Silvestri does, but Alan Silvestri holds back when he needs to hold back and just lets the scene do its thing, all right? He doesn't have to fill every space with music. It's really frustrating to me what John Williams does.
I thought that if you were attacking elements of the film that I had a fondness for, I would be upset. But to be perfectly honest, seeing how upset it's making you is really, I'm getting a lot of joy from that.
This is an audio-only podcast, but just I'm being very animated in my annoyance, guys. Yes.
Yeah, and I'm smirking right back at it. I love it. All right, so we move ahead to Venice, and we were saying beautiful locations. That
library and
so
like when
nice.
it comes in on the canal, like it's just gorgeous.
Yeah, and we get into our first sort of treasure hunty moment of the film, like following clues, and this is always something that I know you're not a big fan for you, but this is always something that I've loved in films, like The Mummy, The Da Vinci Code, even like National Treasure and Sahara.
I made the note, is Da Vinci Code just Indiana Jones for adults? Because like when that scene in the library in Venice occurs, Da Vinci Code instantly came to mind. All right, now, Da Vinci Code as a film / a book is much darker and more adult in its content than Indiana Jones is, but it still just felt like a very similar idea of the quest, the building being rigged to do different things and all the things, right?
Oh, well, I mean, it's the genre, right?
Yeah.
Any film that has similar tropes falls into that category because of the genre, not because it's just completely ripping off another film. But like, I like the fact that X marks the spot after he's just said that X never marks the spot. And I think that big reveal of the Roman numerals everywhere, and then the camera does like a crane shot up the spiral staircase and we see the X. That's a great reveal.
Agreed.
And
yes.
you even see like, you did have to go up those stairs in order to see it, because it's only a slight change in color when they're down on the ground, because it's like a nice jade X on top of a green tile.
Yes.
So you had to get to that elevated height in order for the reveal to happen.
Yep.
And I think it's beautiful. Like it's shot so well.
And I think because Indy's already being guided by his dad's notes at this stage, right? Like he's
Correct.
following
He's got
clues.
his diary.
Yeah. So this kind of is where we start really getting to understand, because I was trying to pull out thematic kind of ideas from the film beyond just the excitement of the plot. Like, what's this film about? And that scene that you're referring to, I think, adequately demonstrates the idea of it's about looking at things in a different way and learning from the experience and knowledge of others, especially elders. So I like that Indy took the time to consider, how would someone else look at this? How would maybe my dad look at this? How has he got the benefit from thinking outside the square? So I think that's a big thematic element that comes through. Like, you see him learn from his dad's actions and knowledge throughout the film, but that's the first one we see.
Yeah, and I mean, in all of his adventures, there's a element of brain versus brawn.
Yes.
And it's interesting to see that later on in the film, when he is being more action-driven and punching people, his dad is sort of thrown off by it.
Yes.
Yet all of the brainy side of things, you're like, okay, so this is where he gets it from. Like, he was raised on these ideas, and his dad even mentions at one point later in the film, you left just as you were getting interesting. So just as their shared interests were coming into alignment, he left because he wasn't receiving the affection and love that a father figure should be providing.
Yes. But anyway, so Indy then finds a way to enter into a cave full of rats.
And the way that he enters is through that very gimmicky joke of the pylon matching the guy stamping the books.
I love that. Like, so there's an interview with Steven Spielberg where he has said he's not good at comedy. But I would disagree with that because...
Wholeheartedly.
Because he does visual comedy and situational comedy. He doesn't make a whole film. Like, I don't know if you've ever seen the film 1941 that he made. I haven't, but supposedly it's the worst film he's ever made because he tried to make a comedy film.
Right.
But when he makes an adventure film and has little things like that, like what you're talking about, the old man stamping and the sound, like being, and he's concerned and he puts the stamp down.
But it's edited so well,
So
where
great.
you never see both of the actions happen. You see one of the actions, then you see the reaction from the other character. It's done really, really well. And it's littered throughout the entire film.
Absolutely.
There's so many like little gimmicky jokes that you go, if you'd done that in a different way, it probably wouldn't have worked. But you've kind of pulled it off through like charisma and editing. And it just, I think the film balances that comedic aspect incredibly well.
Yes, agreed.
Alrighty, so they're wandering through the sewers, and whenever they find clues, Elsa always compares Indy to his dad. Says like he's a great deal like his father, which is really funny. At the time, you're just like, yeah, because they're both smart. And then later on in the film, you find out that she was seducing them both and has actually slept with them both.
Yeah, like just a weird thing that they used as the storyline. It works, I guess, but did they need to have it that... Did she become more sinister because she's done that? I don't think... She's already a Nazi by the time we get to really know her. Like,
it's hard to become much more sinister than being a Nazi. But look, to be honest, coming off the back of last week, I think they're really trying to play on the femme fatale tropes. Just the fact that she's been recruited to use her femininity to manipulate men.
Yeah.
And how easily they fall for it.
Yep, agreed. Yep. Okay.
As they're wandering through the tunnel, at one point she's like, oh, is this what we're looking for? And it's an engraving of the Ark of the Covenant. And he's like, no, that's the Ark of the Covenant. Don't worry about that one. I've already ticked that one off. Because that's what they find in the first film.
I didn't see that reference.
But at the time that she points it out, the music from the first Indiana Jones films, like the theme of the Ark, comes in and plays as an underscore.
Oh, so that probably annoyed me because it was a...
I'm sure it did. Well, yeah, but you wouldn't have recognized it because you've blocked that film out of your memory.
Yeah.
And then, we get to the section where they introduce the petroleum underneath. Indy makes a remark like, oh, I should just set up a well down here and retire.
So just to clarify, like they're wading through petroleum. Mm-hmm. And then as they walk in more to where the tombs are, they're then waist deep in petroleum. Mm-hmm. And then eventually whatever bad guys after them in that scene, because there's an array of people that come in as antagonists. And I do like that. I like that there's not, like, obviously the Nazis kind of became the main ones, but there's all these different people that are being presented, at least initially, as someone who's after Indy and whatever he's after.
Yeah, there's not just two sides. There's lots of different people with lots of different motives.
Which I like that, and I also like how... Going back to what we're talking about with using Christianity and the Holy Grail as a plot device, because there's so many different cultures and so many different people kind of wanting to either protect it or obtain it, like it brings brings in more of a historical desire rather than it being just embedded in like a single culture, like a good versus evil single duality for it.
Well, yeah, because even amongst the bad guys, both in Raiders and this film, the main villain isn't a Nazi.
Yeah.
But just recruits the Nazis to essentially do their bidding. They have their own plan of what they want out of it, but they just manipulate them into be like, yeah, do this because we have a shared mutual interest. Which is, it's fascinating.
Is there shared mutual interest like just burning a lot of rats? Because that happens.
I mean... I can kind of get on board with that. I'm not a huge rat fan. How would you feel about wading through those rats?
Oh, so with the wading through of the rats, did you notice the shots that like the rats are in the foreground? And so I wanted to like consider Harrison Ford and the actress who played Elsa.
I have remembered her having an amusing name. I've written
Doody.
Doody, that's it, Alison Doody.
Alison Doody. Yes. Would I have remembered her name if it wasn't something as comical as Doody? Probably
not. But look how mature we are.
That's right. So yeah, like they are walking through these puddles, tunnels with the rats. But there's shots where the rats are in the foreground to make it look like there's more rats around them than maybe actually were while they were doing their acting. But then, like, a couple of shots later, they do have the ones where they're walking past the rats at their head, and, you know, they're in, like, the tomb upside down with the rats. So I do think that Doody and Ford had to interact with a lot of rats.
Yeah, which is pretty impressive.
Yeah, like, I wouldn't want to do that. Like, no matter how much I am fine with animals get to be animals and do their thing, I don't want to be in a upside-down tomb full of rats. No, I don't. And at this point, too, I mean, Harrison Ford loves the film, so he's probably going to do anything that they ask him to do because he just has so much passion for the character. But at this point, we're film 3 of a very successful franchise. He could be making demands left, right, and center. Agreed. Yes. So maybe he didn't CGI in the rats. I know that at this stage CGI wasn't at that point where, like, Spielberg would say that for Jurassic Park, I guess, where he was CGIing in animals. But
Or Kingdom of the Crystal Skull.
Yes, okay.
You're like, as long as I don't have to watch it, you can make as many other Indiana Jones references as you like.
Exactly. Yes.
I think it's very impressive that they do that. And I think it adds an extra level of, like, there's always elements of that. There's snakes in the first one, there's spiders in the second one, or insects in the second one, and then rats in the third one. And it just gives you an extra level of, like, this is what he's going to go to.
Yeah.
The effort that he's going to go to for a cause that he believes in, or to get his dad back. But also it shows his kind of fearless nature.
Agreed, yeah.
But then we go into the boat chase, which I thought was a really cool kind of stunt.
I love the boat chase, yes.
Hey!
Especially when, like, one of the stuntmen runs after and he launches onto the boat as Indy and Elsa are taking off. And I just, that stunt, I'm like, that's cool. And then, the chase is cool. And then, like,
going between the boats is really good.
Yeah, it's a great scene. It's good fun.
I did find it really interesting. I mean, these guys die for their mission, right? Mm-hmm. And Harrison Ford is holding him up against the propeller of the other boat. And he's like, tell me and I'll let you live. And he's like, no, I'm prepared to die for my cause. I'm not going to tell you anything. Are you prepared to die? And so Harrison Ford's like, damn it, he's got me. Let's get out of here. And immediately in the next scene, he's like, okay, if you let me go, I'll tell you. It's like, what? You weren't going to tell him when you were going to die, but now you're just like, I'd just like to be released. Can you please let me go? I'll tell you. And he's very willing to give up the information like they're friends now.
Well, is that because Indy showed mercy and didn't leave him to die with the boat propeller and, like, brought him onto the other boat? I went with it. Like, it worked for me enough.
In my head, I had always remembered it as he finds out that Indy has more pure motives. Yes. And that he's not after it. But he doesn't find that information out until after he offers up the info.
Right, okay.
So, yeah, it was just interesting how, like, he was like, I'm prepared to die for it. All right, I'll tell you. That's fine. Great scene. Elsa gets super defensive afterwards because Indy didn't tell her that he had the diary. And she's like, oh, so you didn't trust me. Well, she's a Nazi, so good for him.
Well, he didn't know at that stage that she was a Nazi.
I mean, there were clues. She's Austrian, for starters.
Yes,
I mean,
yes.
I've seen The Sound of Music. I know how that goes.
So just to kind of check off where we're at, we have Italians in because they're in Venice. Mm-hmm. We have Germans in, like Austrian, because the Nazis are there.
We're all Austrian.
Yeah. Then we have the fez-wearing crew are from Turkey. Are they Turkish?
Quite possibly.
Yeah, I believe that. That's where I picked up that they were from. The eclectic nature of the diversity that's represented, and not always in a villainous manner, is, I think, kind of progressive for this film in thinking about 89.
Yeah, that's a great point, actually.
Yeah. But it's still, at the end of the day, an American white man that's saving the day at the front of it all.
Yes, we've had white men at the forefront of the films that we've been discussing since the start of the year.
Yes.
And we were looking for a change-up, which fortunately we've had a recommendation.
And an absolute coincidence, absolutely. So we had a student come forward with a film and it's like, perfect. Yeah, it'll be a bit different this upcoming Friday.
Yeah, new change in the type of lead character, but also a new decade, finally.
Yes.
We're out of the 80s.
Yes.
Moving on to the castle sequence, which I always found the Scottish accent as he comes into the castle hilarious as a kid. No doubt, based on the fact that you don't like many things in this film, that one rubbed you the wrong way.
Yeah, no, I just had to double recall what you're referring to. Oh yes, of course. When
he comes in, he's talking about the tapestries.
Yes.
Yeah. No good?
Nope.
Didn't land for you?
Didn't write a single note on it. It was just a dead scene for me.
Dead scene. Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, that's going to be a little skewed anyway. So if people like the film, they can't be like, oh, well, we should write off that scene because you don't like any of the films. So.
Yes.
But yeah, there's a couple of cool moments in this sequence too, though. He swings to rescue his dad. He does like the whip crack and then swings around. I've never understood, how does the whip work? Often he can just whip something and it latches on and then can take his weight.
So he can whip it, but then he can sometimes whip it good.
And then sometimes whip it real good. as a weapon, I totally get it. But when he actually uses it in the films and he's able to latch onto something and then swing from it, I don't get the logistics of it.
Oh, in terms of like when he can wrap it
around something.
Yeah,
yeah.
yes.
Is it just like the next layer of it wrapping around is securing it in?
I feel like it's got enough traction. We're really getting into the weeds on this one. I love it.
If we've got any whip expert listeners, we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah.
Explain the logistics of whips.
So being a leather whip, I reckon it'd have enough friction and therefore enough grip when it wraps around and comes back in connection with itself. It would at least temporarily hold some kind of grip amount there.
There you go.
At least enough to get Sean Connery's leg when he's on the tank.
This is his big introduction, suitably coming in straight after a terrible Scottish accent.
Yes, when he does appear, I was shaken, not stirred.
Oh, that's good.
Yes.
That's very good.
Yes.
All right, and it's a great introduction. We instantly are reminded of the dysfunction of their relationship by him breaking the vase on his head and then showing more concern because the vase was valuable than for his own son's well-being.
Yeah, and this is when I kind of came to be aware of where we were at this point, which is about 48 minutes into the film. This is when Sean Connery is first revealed. Another thematic kind of idea that's coming around is whether the drive to find the Holy Grail or the drive to get something into a museum, like whatever drives Indy and drives, what's his dad's name?
Henry Jones Jr.
Thank you. Whatever drives Henry as well, is it just pure obsession or is it legitimate concern for antiquity and making sure history is preserved? I feel like for Henry and for Indy, they are pure of heart and they are doing it for the right reasons. But this question comes up throughout the film. And even for Indy, what is actually driving him to take the actions that he takes?
I think it's interesting because obsession is a young man's game, and that comes out as a thematic idea a lot. And so you look at someone like Henry Jones Sr. and you go, well, he's an old man now and he's still obsessed. And I wonder if it comes down to the fact that after Indy's mum has passed away, left. I feel like this is something.
Yeah, do we have that?
It definitely comes up in the film, and I'm just blanking on it. But I think because he was so obsessed, and he feels he's lost all this time for family, he's like, well, I've missed my chance to have a family. So if I don't have obsession of this particular thing, what do I have?
And this goes into a more deeper philosophical kind of contemplation around everyone needs a sense of purpose, right? So is that what Indy's purpose is to preserve history, to make sure that things are put where they need to be, like everything in its right place.
As part of the flashback, you know that he always had this sort of moral sense to do that?
Yeah, yes. Whereas reversely, when we have characters that are trying to obtain the Holy Grail, as an example, what's driving these characters? Where is their desire coming from? Is it through the notoriety? Is it through the power? Absolutely, for the Holy Grail, it's immortality because...
But it's interesting you say that because later on in the film, he does this, like Donovan does this big spiel about, the Nazis can have the world. I just want immortality, which is such a contrast to what we usually see from villains in films. They want like power and they want to like own something. But Donovan just wants self-preservation.
He just wants to live forever,
yeah.
Even if he doesn't then live with wealth or power.
Yeah, he literally says to Indy, like, is that the limit of your vision? Controlling the world. As if just wanting his own life is so much bigger than controlling the world.
Yeah.
It kind of flips it on its head of what a villain's motives would usually be.
Speaking of flipping, then we have the scene where it's back and forth in the fireplace.
Oh, yes. Yeah. And when they're asking about Marcus and they're talking Marcus up, like, oh, he knows 20 different languages and he's going to be so good. And then just cuts. Does anyone speak English?
I'm going to call it now. Best on ground for me is Brody.
He's so much goofier than I remember him being.
I agree. Like, I haven't said this already. Like, I haven't watched this film since, like, I'd say the early to mid 90s. Like, so not long after it came out. I had vague memories of certain things from it, and I knew that there was.
You'd wake up in a cold sweat thinking about it.
But yeah, I agreed. I didn't remember the Brody character, and like because he's a recurring character from the other.
So he's in 1 and 3, same as Salah.
Okay, yeah. So I certainly don't know if he's as comical in 1 as he is in 3.
He's not as heavily involved, so he only plays that kind of role at the very beginning to introduce him to the men, the top men who hire Indy.
Right.
Whereas in this one, he obviously goes on the adventure, and you see that he's just not equipped to be there with them.
But like, it's so much comic relief that comes from it. Like even in a later scene when they pass him the water bottle to wet the whistle, and then the other Nazi comes and takes it from him just as he's about to drink
it.
Just a little things like that. I love that stuff.
Yeah, he's very good.
Yeah.
But yeah, as you were saying, they get tied up. They get the German goodbye and the Austrian goodbye. But yeah, so they're jumping around, and the irony of the only place in the room that's not on fire being the fireplace.
Yes, and it was his lucky charm that sets the place on fire as well. Very ironic.
But yeah, then we get the screaming character, which very much reminded me of Frau Farbissina from Austin Powers.
Oh, yes, of course. Now,
The German yelling.
Yes.
Such a stereotype.
Yes, for sure.
But yeah, so they set the boats off and then jump in the motorbike. Now, I don't know about you, but this was a plot point that didn't make any sense to me. They set the boats off to lead them on like a wild goose chase after the boats, and then immediately ride out behind them before they have an opportunity to get in their own boat and go off after the boats that they've set.
Yeah, I can't explain it.
Just wasted time that they could have been getting away.
Now that you're bringing up the motorbike, are we at the scene? Like, is there multiple motorbike scenes?
No, this is like the motorbike with the side carriage.
Yeah.
With Sean Connery.
All right, so this is a great scene.
Yeah.
In terms of action, and like this is the scene or the actual shot of the helicopter going through the tunnel.
The plane going through the tunnel.
The plane.
They're in a car during that sequence because the plane comes next to them while they're driving in the car. Yes,
correct.
That's after they've been on
right.
the blimp and everything. This is the motorbikes. They're all going after them, and he ends up sticking the flagpole in the spokes of the bike, and it flips out.
Yes.
The thing that this sequence does is it shows you how different Sean Connery's character and Harrison Ford's character are, because they're both really into the archaeology aspect of it, but Harrison Ford really likes the action aspect as well.
Yeah, I love you calling it out before with the brains versus brawn, and it's something we see time and time again. We see it later on with the pen being mightier than the sword. But then, and we don't always have it just that Indy is learning from Henry. It can be the other way around as well. Like Henry does take on in the final act traits of Indy in terms of taking action when required. But yeah, like it's the scene when he's leaving to get on the motorbikes that you're referring to. I can't believe you just did that.
Yeah.
I can't believe you just did that.
Yeah.
It's like, what did he do? He mowed down Nazis that were about to kill him. Yeah.
But I just the fact that anytime he does do something, he keeps looking at his dad for approval. He's like smiling, like, look at what I've done. It's so great. And Sean Connery just gives him nothing in return.
Yeah.
Then we get the book burning scene before they jump on the blimp because he has to get the diary back.
Oh, no.
We get the Hitler cameo. He's going
I love that. I've forgotten about that.
It's so good. He's going around signing things.
Yeah. That scene looked great as well, like trying to immerse us into a late 30s Nazi kind of soiree. I don't know what you'd call it.
I believe they called them shindigs. Nazi
right?
shindigs. Yes.
Yeah. Are you going down to the Nazi party later on? That's why it was called the Nazi party. So
that's great.
But yeah, like that whole book signing interaction, I adored it. I just Harrison Ford acted really well in that as well. His response to running into Hitler, and then you have that tension build for a second there, and then Hitler goes for the pencil.
I appreciate that you had a good thing to say about Harrison Ford in that scene.
Yep.
I didn't think we'd get one.
Mark it.
I shall. There's only one so far. But yes, then we got the blimp scene, the Zeppelin.
All right, so I've saved my favourite bit of trivia that I found while I was watching the film.
Exactly what you're going to say. Go for it.
Can I take it on this
Please,
one? All right.
please.
And I was trying to work out, because when I read it, I'm like, okay, this is great. And then trying to work out when, is it after they've sat down?
After he's already punched out the guy and thrown him off.
Yes.
Because in that sequence, he's wearing like a teeny tiny uniform.
Yes.
That's a running joke in the Indiana Jones films. He
Okay.
always beats up guys who are much smaller than him. And then when he tries to dress in their clothes, they don't fit.
But is this the first film where he delivers that great line of no ticket to justify throwing him off? I loved that. That was fun.
It was good.
Yeah.
It was really good. But yes, it's the scene after that where they're just chatting.
Thereafter, they're just chatting. And the trivia is that they decided, Sean Connery and Harrison Ford, or whoever was on the set at that time, that it was too hot. So they decided to take their pants off.
Which is why, as a dedication today, we're recording the podcast without any pants on.
Without any pants on right now, because we are too hot.
Yes. Wow, we get that a lot. But it's just so great. Like when you hear the story of it, I've heard it from Sean Connery in an interview.
Right.
Telling the story. And he basically says that he had made the decision because he'd be sweating too much. And he'd have to keep stopping the take. And then just Harrison Ford, out of, I guess, respect, also took his pants off to do the sequence.
I love thinking about that interaction and that decision being made on the set. It's just a lot of fun.
Yeah. But then we get a little bit more of a insight into their relationship. We get Indy sort of reaching out, trying to be like, all right, well, let's have a chat now. Sean Connery calls him out. He's like, well, what do you want to chat about?
Yeah, true. So this is where the real relationship development kind of connects with me in terms of the father-son stuff. That conflict is really built within that scene.
Harrison Ford's calling him out, like, you had a bit of an obligation to be there for me. And then Sean Connery's like, no, I taught you independence. Like, look how well you've turned out because of what I did or didn't do.
And that bit of dialogue, I sat there going, okay, so who's right? And that's what's so great about the way it's written was Henry's approach to fatherhood, a good one or a bad one?
It's the line I brought up before about him saying, you left just as you were getting interested. I think that's a point where you go like, no, he had too much of an expectation on a child, essentially.
Yeah.
He was just growing up. He didn't have to take on the world at that stage. It's almost like he was a disappointment, and he's like, well, yeah, but he's not there to meet your approval and be the most interesting thing in the world.
Every time that Harrison Ford whinily said, Dad, the amount of time... Dad!
He's got that growl about him.
Dad! But it just still sounds like young, whiny kid. The way
sure.
I'm sure he was told or decided as an actor to do it that way. But it really works because it kind of always grounds any kind of action or interaction that's occurring that it is a father and son. All right? So no matter if you're a 40-year-old man chasing a 65-year-old man or however old they are, it's still your dad, and you're still going, Dad! Yeah, I love it.
I tell you what aspects of kind of like mirroring that father-son relationship that I really, really enjoyed. It was all the times Indy had to explain something as if he's a dad who's picking up an iPad for the first time and he's explaining how to use it. It's just like he's in the plane and he's like 10 o'clock and then Sean Connery takes out his watch. And he's like, no, 12, 11, 10 o'clock.
Yes. Yeah, unfortunately it's quite clear that they're not in a plane because the green screen work in this film is atrocious. Like, in 89, I'm sure they had better to work with than this. Maybe it's because it's been remastered and then we can see it more clearly. They're not in the sky anywhere near it.
Yeah, it gets worse in the latter films.
Oh, right, okay.
But yeah, this is where that plane scene comes in that you were talking about, where they crash the plane, they get in a car, and then the plane that's coming after them goes through the tunnel with them.
Yes.
And they both have this moment where they're just looking at each other through the window. And yeah, he says that great line where he's like, oh, they don't come any closer than that. And then the bomb goes off and they crash the car.
Yes, and then they go down to the beach where Sean Connery, Henry, being inspired in his face, and then he gets his umbrella out and starts like kind of what is it?
He goes, "Chook, chook, 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 chook."
And the Harrison Ford, like Indy going, "What is Dad doing, Dad?" He doesn't say it at that point, but I just in his mind he's saying it, and then it all becoming apparent why Henry has done what he's done, and he gets the plane taken down, and he has that great quote about letting the rocks and the birds be his weapon or something like that.
It's funny how you said it's a great quote. I agree it's a great quote, and yet neither of us can remember what it is.
Yes, but like Connery on the beach, that scene is so much fun.
Connery on the beach, that should be a drink. He does shine in scenes on the beach. Dr. No in his little blue short shorts.
Yes.
But no, it's interesting watching that sequence because that's exactly what happened earlier with Indy taking some people out and then expecting, like smugly looking at his dad and not getting the approval he wanted. And now Sean Connery has taken someone out and he pops up the umbrella and just like casually strolls back like, look at what I did.
Yeah.
It's pretty impressive.
So I'm going to call it out. We called it out before, R.I.P. rats. I'm going to say R.I.P. seagulls in this one as well because then the plane comes down from the seagulls entering the propellers. Spielberg really doesn't care about animals, clearly, like the way he puts them into the firing line to make sure Indy and Henry get away.
I've heard that about Spielberg.
Yeah.
Hates animals.
Yes.
This leads us on to, personally, it's my favourite scene, the valley, with the tanks and the horses and the camels. The camels, which Indy has a...
What I was trying to work out, is that like a callback to like something else? Why he doesn't want Salah to get the camels, and then he ends up bringing 4 camels. I was trying to work out what the joke was there. I couldn't get it.
On top of Salah getting 4 camels to replace his brother-in-law's car that just exploded, I don't know the joke either. I think you're probably right. It might be a callback.
Because he's very adamant, no camels.
Yeah, and I wonder if his logic behind it is that maybe just in terms of stealth or in terms of speed, he sees horses as
Maybe
more
it's just
efficient.
as simple as
Camels
that,
are actually better for the conditions they're in, though.
Yeah, but I thought it was similar to like the I hate snakes, I hate rats.
And it
thing.
very well may be.
Yeah.
They're going to take away my title as head of the Indiana Jones fan club with all of these balls that I'm dropping today in terms of my understanding of it.
Yes.
If anybody knows why camels are subpar or what happened to Indy's mum, please comment below so that we can backtrack and find out. But yes, this is my favourite scene, and it marks a change in the sequence too because Indy removes his tie. It's business time now. He's ready to get his hands dirty.
Ah, right.
He takes off his tie, and we get the classic Raiders / Temple of Doom Indy with his shirt buttoned down to his navel, ready to wreak havoc on the Nazis. And this is when like the Secret Society returns as well and offers a great assist because they just kind of create chaos and panic as an opportunity for Indy to be like, cool, taking advantage of this.
You know what else happens in this scene?
What else happens in this scene? Oh, the Wilhelm Scream.
The Wilhelm
I
Scream.
knew you. Yes.
Yep.
So for anyone that doesn't know, would you like to explain the Wilhelm Scream?
No, by all means, you go for it.
All right, so it is a stock sound effect that has been used in so many titles since, I think it was the 50s that it originated. And the original sound effect was not actually referred to as the Wilhelm Scream. It was one of its later uses that by a character or a person that was named Wilhelm, and that's where the title came from. But the sound effect existed for years and years before it was actually titled that. But it gets used in a lot of George Lucas films, and now it kind of is a bit of a joke of the industry.
Yes.
It is such a recognizable scream because it's not a very natural sounding scream, so it doesn't just blend into the background. When you hear it,
it's a shriek. It's commonly used where a male villain is like getting his comeuppance of some variety. One that comes to mind is Tarantino loves using it. He's used it in Glorious Bastards and stuff like that. Funnily enough, when he's blasting up Nazis.
Yeah. Maybe it's just that's how Nazis screamed.
Maybe so. Wilhelm being kind of a Germanish name.
Wilhelm. There it is.
Yeah.
So in this sequence, another thing that's great, I mean, we were talking about Indy riding horses. You can quite clearly see it's Harrison Ford a lot of the times. Maybe not in the giant lunge from the horse to the tank. But again, there's a clumsiness to this scene. Like people are accidentally getting hit. When he shoots one guard and it happens to go through all 3 people, he sort of seems shocked by the outcome. So he's not super smooth in this scene. A lot of things are going wrong. He often gets caught in like the track of the tank and it gets like pushed along or trips over. It makes the scene a little bit more intense, especially at the point where he falls off the side of it and starts to get wedged between the tank and the wall.
I mean, yeah, I would agree that it is adding intensity, but I do think the way that this scene plays out, it becomes a bit slapstick. There's so much happening where things are going wrong. Like, it becomes almost like watching a Three Stooges like sequence for me.
I think a lot of that happens within the tank with the Sean Connery character and Marcus. Who's Marcus?
Brody.
Denham Elliott.
Yes.
And yeah, I feel like they're more slapsticky. There is definitely aspects of it with Harrison Ford on top of the tank, but it's only because it keeps cutting back between lots of different people. And it's like when he hits the top of the tank, then the arm piece of the viewfinder hits them on the back of the head, and then the pen squirting in the face. Like, there's lots of things in sequence, whereas the action on top of the tank, I don't think, as an isolated sequence, that would be slapsticky.
Agreed, yeah. So just to clarify, not just exclusively what's happening there, that it is the sequence and everything happening within various parts of it for sure. And because there's so much happening within that piece of action. I find it tiresome at that point. Like the amount of like
my favorite scene, and you're like, and that's when I hated it.
Well, it's not because of that exclusively. It's because the whole film runs on these peaks and troughs of here's some like crazy action scene, and then we're going to give you a bit more plot, and here's another crazy action scene, and we're going to give you a bit more plot. And that's a common way that narrative is built for an adventure film. It's not exclusive to this film, but I find it tiresome.
What I appreciated about it is that there's these moments where you can see he doesn't want to be there, but he has to go on. You get these really cool bit where he is wedged between the wall and the tank. He's trapped there because of his bag. And you can see he just wants to let go. At that point, he was like, I'm happy to just drop off this. And he physically can't get out because he's stuck. And I just think it's like a cool moment of representing the entire time he's there because he has to be there, not because he wants to be there.
Yeah.
He's a reluctant hero.
Yes. Oh, I like that label. Anyway, the tank goes over the edge.
You're like, I don't care. Let's move on.
Because it's at this point when this action sequence has finished that you're
relieved.
Sorry?
And you're relieved.
I am relieved in hindsight because I love the rest of the film.
Hey!
Okay, so from here on...
You heard it here first, guys.
So they're in the Valley of the Crested Moon, is that what it's called?
Crescent Moon.
Crescent Moon. Yes, that makes more sense. And from my childhood, I had a memory of the front, like, you know, the carved front to where the Holy Grail is kept.
Yeah, what do you reckon, miniatures?
Assumedly, yeah. But
it looks great.
Yeah, and it looked so good when I was 8 years old, that I remembered this setting more than anything else.
Right.
Like, yeah.
That's cool.
Everything that happens thereafter is just fun. Like, it's a lot of fun.
I had a bit of a flashback to my childhood when they first go in there and you see the trap comes out and his head gets cut off.
Yes.
That was always a moment where when I was growing up, all right, shut your eyes now. You're not allowed to watch this part.
At that point, it's like, how is this film rated PG? There's decapitation in this film. Huh. And it's not even the scariest thing. There's something coming up that is much more scarier.
Well, yeah, but I guess because the much more scarier bit is a little bit supernatural and unrealistic, then you go like, well, you can separate it a bit more. But it's more traumatic for a kid to go, a person's head got cut off.
I still think this is another perfect example of something I think we've covered in a previous podcast episode where the 80s PG rating was a bit more lenient with what they let through to the keeper.
I think we have covered it in a previous podcast, but just in case, everybody better go back, listen to all our podcasts.
Like and subscribe.
Double check.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, so the first trap, only the penitent man will pass. I'm not sure that clue is a sufficient enough clue to get you through that trap. He says the penitent man kneels before God. He's a humble person, he kneels before God. And so he kneels, Then he does a little spinny somersault as well. I don't think you would kneel and then somersault if you were penitent.
And what if he had realised it a couple of seconds earlier? He wouldn't have knelt at the right time.
At the right time,
yeah. So, these are plot points that are just hollow.
That's it. I've changed my mind. I hate the film now. The second one, I mean, I got nothing to say on the tapping the Jehovah one. That's pretty basic. But I do have something to say on the leap of faith.
As do I.
Hey!
As if you wouldn't see that bridge.
So this is what I said. The scene is shot really well. I mean, look, the effects are a little bit janky because they're using a miniature and then he's just standing on a green screen. But the concept only works if you're seeing the bridge from the angle that we, the audience, is seeing the bridge.
Correct. Not the angle that he would see it from.
And any way that you kind of turned, like, you can't make the bridge so that if you see it from any angle, it will manipulate and change with the rocks. So what if there's a slight lighting change?
Yes.
Put some fire over it. Or...
What if it's a 5-foot man versus a 6.5-foot man walking in for that third challenge? And then, like, this is just validated when he gets to the other side. Well, when he's getting to the other side and we have the camera angle come up from underneath and the bridge is so blatantly there. Like, they try and bring it back into belief where when he's crossed, he throws the sand over it.
And it goes from being invisible to
visible. So to just kind of really confirm the concept, but I was already lost at that point. I'd be double checking. And
you just tap your toe.
Yeah.
But because he knows it's a leap of faith, maybe he thinks that by doubting it, it wouldn't work.
Yeah.
However, I think the way that the scene is shot has that sense of awe about it, and it is quite cool as an audience member watching the visuals of it and seeing it as he sees it and then the camera panning out and showing you the different angle. I think it's a cool concept.
Agreed, and I think this is really the checkpoint, well, it's not the final one, but it's certainly the checkpoint as to how have you connected with the film? Have you invested into the story at this point to just put aside maybe these minor points of contention in terms of continuity and believability and go, yep, I'm still on board. And so I can see this would be one that kind of wins still for the audience.
If you like the film. Yeah. So then we're introduced to the night of the Crusades, and I love just this old weak man who's just like, doesn't even put up a fight because he's too old to do it. But it made me think, then what is the appeal of eternal life? It's not eternal youth. It's just eternal life. You still age. Who wants to live forever if you're still going to get old and weak?
This is a valid point.
It's the first time I've ever thought about it because throughout the entire film, as it's explained to you, it makes it seem like, oh, well, it's every man's dream. Like, he even says, like, it's every old man's dream earlier in the film. You're like, yeah, because it's like to stay young forever. But you don't stay young forever. You just stay alive forever.
So it doesn't pause you at that point.
No, because that's the reason that this Crusades knight is still alive, because he drank from the cup.
Right.
And they even tell the story of the two guys who found the cup and had a drink and then returned from the desert like centuries later as old men.
This is an interesting point.
Yeah, right?
New stuff has come to light.
So, not that you needed any more incentive not to like the film, but
and look, like, I liked this character. This character, like, he reminded me of like a Hans Moleman kind of like meh. Like he's trying to be like chivalrous and strong, but he's so decrepit. I can see Hans Moleman from The Simpsons being this character.
Down I go. But yes, the rapid aging effect, I thought it was pretty cool.
Of when Donovan?
Donovan, yeah.
Donovan drinks it. Yeah, it looks great.
Because they do it in cuts at first and just use makeup to age him, and then they only use the CGI kind of effect for a very minute aspect of it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. They have the shot where from his behind him and seeing Elsa's reaction to his hair rapidly growing.
Yeah.
Then it cuts to the front and we get to see what she's seeing. And yeah, it's a very quick shot, but it's traumatizing to a young kid, I'm sure, because it's very horrific and very graphic and
the scream with it as well.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So it's very spooky stuff done very well.
Yeah, I agree. So then we try and leave. Elsa crosses the seal.
Even though she was told she can't.
Yeah, I know.
Listen, just listen.
Listen, Elsa, God. But I like this moment because she's clearly obsessed. Indy tries to convince her not to.
I do like that. Yeah,
and she's like, no, she's too obsessed. She goes down. And then Indy immediately falls in her position and Henry Sr. has to kind of convince him to let it go. They do two really great things in this moment where he's always been presented as someone who can't let things go himself. And now he's convincing his son to let it go. And he does so by calling him Indiana for the very first time in the film.
Yes.
As opposed to Henry Jones Jr.
Yes.
He's no longer kind of saying, you're living in my shadow, you're your own person, but also you don't need this cup.
Yes.
His dad kind of taught him obsession, and now he's teaching him the value of letting it go.
Yeah, I think there's lessons learned throughout the film for both Indy and Henry. Like, obviously, our antagonists don't, the lessons learned is through their demise. But yeah, I love that, like, because I'm always reluctant to jump into a film like this, like an action film, without it having substance. But this film had substance. The father-son relationship, what that means, a form of reconciliation, and also acceptance of who they are as people. It's a nice message at the end there.
Completed with one more fun moment from Marcus. Follow me! And he rides off into the sunset.
I like that borders on too much, but I still liked it.
What about the fact that he does that and then Sean Connery calls him out for getting lost in his own museum one time? It's a good way to end. A bit of levity right at the end.
Yeah, and then we see the silhouette of the four, and, you know, like I pointed out before, 3 out of 4 of those characters I love.
What happened to all the other Nazis?
Oh, they just decided that I don't have an answer to that.
Have a good one, guys. We're heading off.
Yes.
Overall, what did you think? You didn't love the film?
I certainly didn't loathe sitting with it.
That's a glowing review.
I will point out that I stopped it halfway through on Sunday night and went and watched the rest of it on the Monday night because I just...
The way the films are intended to be watched?
Well, these days, like, our attention span can only last an hour. I don't think it's a terrible film. It's not something I would actively revisit.
Right. Look, I must say that after you had come in strong with negativity at the beginning, I was surprised and very relieved to see that, or hear that you didn't have too many bad things to say about the film.
I'm always going to be fair to a film. Now, this film is popular for a reason because it's got a great lot of stuff in it that is a lot of fun. So for me to then come in and just say there's nothing good about it, that was never going to happen.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, look, I love Indiana Jones. Raiders is one of my top films of all time. It was really nice being able to watch it. It got me kind of amped up for the new one coming out too. So it felt like good timing to be revisiting the franchise.
So I'm excited for that film because it's going to be directed by James Mangold, who's done a bunch of great stuff. And it's got Phoebe Waller-Bridge in it as well, who is just an awesome actor. So I'm very excited. And I think there's a few other names that are possibly going to pop up in it.
I don't know if anyone told you. You know Harrison Ford's going to be in it.
Yeah, so, you know, I'll have to just turn a blind eye every time Indiana Jones is on the screen. But outside of that, it might be a really fun experience.
I'm sure he won't come up all that often.
Yeah.
I did want to mention, last week you brought up the idea of a code word so that we could identify if people had been listening. But I feel like when a code word is introduced into a podcast, there needs to be some sort of incentive, a reward for those who are able to identify the code words. So I was thinking we should both go away and have a bit of a think about that. We will do another code word now. Today's code word is fedora, but with last week's code word and the remaining code words for the term, I feel like we should have a prize for anyone who's able to identify all of those code words.
So the two that's been revealed now, plus we've got 2 more films that are coming up. So this Friday and next Friday. Next Friday would be the last film that we get through this term because week 10 of this term is Good Friday. Yes.
Great Friday.
Great Friday, especially for watching films. We will continue on with our 5th period podcast over the school holidays.
Yes, we've got something very special planned. Obviously, we have some guidelines and restrictions that we have to meet during the term, but all hell's going to break loose over those holiday periods.
School's out over the holidays, yeah. So keep an ear out for that one, guys. We will reveal more in the upcoming week or two.
We've talked about the film. We're going to do one more segment for the show before we wrap things up. Last week, we introduced a new student-suggested recommendation for a segment, which was to talk about the films that we had watched for the week.
I think last week I had 5. Yeah, 5. This week I have much less. For me, I watched 2 films.
Yeah, right. I mean, for me, I actually saw 4 this week, which was based on the fact that I knew that we'd be talking about them. And I kind of like it as a bit of incentive to go out and see more films.
Certainly, I feel the same way. I did only get to 2 of them, but at least one of them came off the back of going, I am encouraged by this segment to watch a film, so I have more than one film to talk about.
Yeah, I will say one thing that I don't like about it, though, is my usual routine if I see a new film is to come and get your opinion on it. And I felt like I couldn't do that because I knew...
coffee in the morning, we're like holding back from conversation.
Yeah, I meant to tell you, save it for the podcast.
Well,
save
the podcast is now, Mr. Brown, so what have you got for us?
Well, let's jump in. I'm going to start with one that I know we both actually watched over the last week. Marlowe, or as I have retitled it, Marslow.
Yes, so this is it's actually a remake. Did you know that?
It's not really.
No, okay,
a remake.
sorry. I only know from knowing that there's 2 films called Marlowe and it's the same character name.
It is a familiar character, but the actual plot line isn't exactly the same.
Right.
And it's been much more drawn out than the other films. So Marlowe is a character that Humphrey Bogart was very famous for playing in the Maltese Falcon, I believe, or perhaps The Big Sleep. I might be getting my film noirs confused. I think he's Marlowe in The Big Sleep, and the Maltese Falcon is based on a real-life artifact that was actually owned by the Cavendish family, which is the family that appears in this film.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Very, very nice little bit of trivia there. But yes, in terms of this film, the 2023 Marlowe, starring Liam Neeson, Snorefest.
Absolutely.
Only redeeming factor is it looked great.
Phenomenal.
Yep.
The sets were amazing. The costumes were amazing. It just, the narrative was drawn out and convoluted.
Yep.
And just, after expressing how much I appreciated noir last week, this was a real letdown.
So I'm not disagreeing with you on that story, but I will maybe upset you a little bit with this comment. That is par for the course for me with film noir. It's the
I knew you were going to say this.
the sleuth going after someone and just getting turned this way and that. There was nothing uncommon in the way the story was told to me in terms of a film noir.
As I was watching it, I thought to myself, is this how Whitts feels when he's watching regular film noirs?
Yeah. But when you watch the original noir films, are you watching them with a sense of affection for them because they're from an era? Are you inadvertently biased in that manner?
No, I think I do genuinely care about the mystery element. I think that old school noirs actually do keep you guessing in terms of what's going on.
Yeah.
There's some charming characters in them, but I don't necessarily think you care about the characters because they're all quite horrible people. So I think for me, it does heavily rely on the mystery and you wondering what's going to happen next? Whereas in this one, I didn't care what was going to happen next.
Yeah, that's true. At no stage did I care about Marlowe finding, I think his name was Peterson.
Maybe.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. Anyway, we'll move on from it because it is not one that we're recommending.
But I am kind of curious to see how it does. I mean, it's relatively new. Yeah. I want to know if it's also Marlowe at the box office.
You did it.
All right, moving on. I saw a Netflix, it was kind of like a black comedy, I guess. It was like a teen black comedy drama-y thing. It was called Do Revenge, which, as an English teacher, I'm sure grammatically that's an absolute nightmare of a title for you.
Probably why I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah,
nothing to do with what the genre is at all.
Look, to be honest, you probably don't need to see it. It was a bit lackluster for me. Like a bit of fun. Once the narrative started, it felt very, very familiar. So the idea of people who aren't as high on the social rung trying to team up with someone that is and then get revenge through that means. It's very similar to a lot of those teen films, and I don't necessarily think that it brought anything new to the table.
Yeah.
And I also felt like the characters were a bit too cartoonish for me. One thing that teen drama kind of relies on is realistic depictions so that you can actually go, yeah, I could see this happening.
Yep.
So, yeah, it was okay. It was a little bit of fun. Like, as I said, it had comedy elements to it.
How old is it? Like,
Oh, it's relatively new.
Okay, yep.
Not just on Netflix, it's a Netflix release.
Okay,
So,
yep.
But yeah, just again, it was just a bit lackluster. What about you? What have you seen?
The other film I watched over the last week was a film called Nil by Mouth. So this is a film from 1997 that the actor Gary Oldman directed. This is the only film Gary Oldman has ever directed.
That surprises me.
Oh, sorry, 98. Now, I did a bit of like sleuthing on this, noir style, and it was produced by the director Luc Besson. Now, Luc Besson is known primarily for The Fifth Element,
Right.
which starred Gary Oldman.
And is often what you refer to our podcast as.
Yeah. Yes, by mistake. This podcast is called The Fifth Period, not The Fifth Element. But yeah, so that was in 97, and then a year later, Luc Besson is producing a film for Gary Oldman. So I reckon that on the set, Gary Oldman said, I've got this idea for this film. I'm going to help you out. Do you want to help me out? Anyway, the film stars Ray Winston, who went on to be awesome in Sexy Beast, awesome in a Guy Ritchie film or two, I think, as well. Really cool actor. But it is that Southeast London gritty realism that by the way, I do not recommend this film for a teenage audience because there is a lot of graphic violence in it. But there's humanity in it as well, but it is really gritty, traumatizing stuff.
Yeah, okay.
So I enjoyed it. It was a well-told film. It was good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Well, one that is kid-friendly that was on my list, I saw The House with the Clock in Its Walls. Now, this is not a film that I would ordinarily go and see, but I must say that Jack Black is a huge drawing card for me.
So I've seen this film.
Oh, there you go. Any film that has Jack Black in it is always going to be a bit of fun. Even if he is only in a minor role, he always steals the show when he's on screen. But I found it really amusing. You know how they sometimes do a best of roles with actors, and they will go through like a selection of their catalogue and they talk through those films. And there's one for Jack Black where he talks about The Holiday. With Kate Winslet. But he's talking it through and he goes, oh, and I was in that film with Kate Blanchett. And then he goes, oh, wait, no, it wasn't Kate Blanchett. It was Kate Winslet. Not to be confused with any other Kate. And I was watching this through and I just couldn't get that out of my head because now he has been in a film with Kate Blanchett. And she also rose to his level in terms of comedic chops. I thought they had such great chemistry in the film.
Yeah, they did.
Going
like,
back and
what
forth.
I remember of it, like I found it like one of those. It's certainly a kids' film, but a lot of fun going on with it. Like it's very hard for a film to not be fun when Jack Black is doing his thing on the screen.
Did you have another film?
Nope.
Okay, well then we will close with my fourth film, Mithrigan, also known as Megan or Megan.
Yes.
Which, again, you have seen, so you'll have something to contribute to this. I was not interested in watching this film, and then it got rave reviews. Like, people were saying, oh, it's so revolutionary for a horror film.
The promo run on this was phenomenal. They did really well at pushing it into our faces for a good couple of weeks there.
Yeah. I guess perhaps because they did do so well with that. Then I went in with, oh, okay, maybe it's going to be a bit different to what I thought. But it was pretty much exactly what I was expecting.
Exactly what you think.
And nothing really revolutionary about it. They were like, oh, what a great idea to show technology turning against you. It's like, yeah, films have been doing that for years. That's what Terminator is. Especially like the idea of like the AI doll. The reboot of Child's Play recently had a doll that bonded with the child and then took on that overprotective role. So I didn't think there was anything too revolutionary about this film. But what I will say is that the actual making of it, if you get a chance to look into, there's a short clip on YouTube that talks about all the different ways that they brought Mithrigan, which I affectionately call her, to life with animatronics, a bit of puppetry, someone actually acting in the suit. All of those combinations and the reason why they used different combinations and how that had an impact on the eeriness of the film. Some of that symbolic stuff behind the scenes is actually really cool, but I just don't think it's enough to bring the narrative of the film home.
I saw the film Mithrigan 2-3 weeks ago when it came available.
2 or 3 weeks ago.
And I felt exactly the same way, especially into the final act. I thought, oh, we're just going to the schlock horror tropes at this stage. It just didn't appeal to me. Like prior to that, there was glimpses of, oh, this is interesting. You're right, nothing new. But the way it was told, I was putting the lens on of thinking, in terms of a younger audience, would they enjoy this? Because I was contemplating it for a Year 11 media film.
Bit of a lackluster week for me in terms of films, but I'm still excited to kind of keep challenging myself to watch more films so that we can discuss them each week.
For sure.
But yeah, we'd love to get feedback too from a lot of people. Are you enjoying this segment? Does it feel like we're rambling a little bit too long on each of the films? Are there new segments or different things that you'd like us to try and mix up the episodes each week with? Because we're really looking for suggestions. Essentially, we want to appeal to you guys. Whatever you want to hear from us, we're happy to give it a go.
So I am also very excited for the film we've got next week. Again, we have had a student put forward a film where we are going to divert from our path of the 80s. But yeah, all will be revealed on the next podcast.
And on the next podcast too, for film clubbers, if you do want to do an intro, follow in the footsteps of Sharky and Athan, feel free to come and chat to us about it. Have a bit of a think of something fun that you can do to add a spin on it. I loved Athan's woo at the start of this one. He was imitating the guy at the beginning of The Last Crusade, one of the treasure hunters who just enthusiastically woos periodically. So,
well, I'm sorry I wasn't able to enthusiastically woo for this film, but you know, I'll give it a hearty grunt, maybe.
A hearty grunt.
Yes.
That's
so then maybe that's a better rating
praise.
than 3 out of 5. What do you rate it? A hearty grunt.
A hearty grunt sounds like something Tim Allen's character would have done in Home Improvement. Alrighty, so as always, guys, please do like, subscribe, share it around. Check out the channel too. Whitts and I have ventured into a few different areas of videos on there, so try and track them down. If you want us to do more of those, by all means, suggest that as well.
Tell us that you want to be on the podcast, and you know, if you do tell us enough times, Javier, maybe one day Leah will be on the podcast.
Got him. Thanks very much for tuning in, guys, and we'll catch you next week.
See you, everyone.